There's a moment that comes quietly. It doesn't arrive with a loud warning. It doesn't knock on your door. It shows up in the stillness, late at night, when the house is quiet and there's no one left to impress, no one left to perform for. And in that silence, a question begins to surface. Did I live the life I truly wanted, or just the life I was expected to live? For many people over 60, that question carries a weight that's hard to describe. Because by that point, it's no longer about what you might do someday. It's about what you didn't do, not because you couldn't, but because you didn't think you had time or permission or courage. And here's the part most people don't say out loud. By the time people reach their 70s, they're not as afraid of death as you might think. They're afraid of regret. Regret for the words they never said, the chances they never took, the life they postponed until there was no time left to live it. Today, I want to share with you the 5 biggest regrets people over 60 carry. Not to make you feel bad, but to wake you up, gently, honestly, while you still have time. Because if you can see these regrets clearly now, you can choose a different ending. And we begin with the one regret that almost everyone has, but very few people admit. It's the regret of living for others instead of living for yourself. For decades, many people wake up each day and do what's expected. They go to work, not because they love it, but because they have responsibilities. They say yes when they want to say no. They follow paths that feel safe, respectable, acceptable. They become who others need them to be, a good provider, a good parent, a reliable partner. And there's nothing wrong with any of that. But somewhere along the way, something quietly disappears. You, your voice, your desires, your curiosity, your sense of who you are when no one is watching. There was a woman once, in her early 70s, who said something that stayed with me. She said, "I spent my whole life being who everyone needed me to be. And now, I don't know who I am anymore." She had done everything right, raised her children, supported her husband, built a stable life. But when the house became quiet, when the roles faded, she was left with a question she didn't know how to answer. What do I actually want? And that question felt terrifying because she had never allowed herself to ask it before. This is more common than people realize. In fact, a palliative care nurse who worked with patients at the end of life once shared that the most common regret she heard was this: "I wish I had the courage to live a life true to myself, not the life others expected of me." Think about that for a moment. Not money, not status, not even health, but the courage to be yourself. So many people wait. They wait until retirement. They wait until the kids grow up. They wait until things calm down. And by the time they finally look up, decades have passed, and the life they wanted to explore feels distant, unfamiliar, sometimes even impossible. But here's the truth. You don't need permission to choose yourself. Not now, not ever. And the longer you wait, the harder it becomes. The next regret is quieter, but just as painful. It's the regret of not expressing love when you had the chance. There's something many people assume, especially in long relationships. They assume that the other person already knows how they feel, that love doesn't need to be said out loud, that appreciation can be implied, that apologies can be delayed, and forgiveness can wait. But life doesn't always give you the time you think you have. There are phone calls that were never made, messages that were never sent, conversations that were postponed until they could never happen at all. A man once shared that the hardest moment of his life wasn't losing his father. It was realizing, standing at the funeral, that he had never once said, "I love you." Not because he didn't feel it, but because it felt unnecessary, until it wasn't. We often think love is something big, something obvious, but in reality, it's often the small, simple expressions that matter most. I'm proud of you. I forgive you. I'm sorry. I care about you. These words seem small until they're the ones you wish you had said. And once that moment passes, once that person is gone or distant or unreachable, there is no way to go back. That's what makes this regret so heavy. Not just the absence of love, but the absence of expressed love. So if there's someone in your life right now, don't wait. Say it. Call them. Write the message. Have the conversation. Because later is never guaranteed. Another regret that shows up again and again is something many people don't realize until it's far too late. It's the regret of working too much and living too little. Now, work is important. It gives structure, purpose, stability. But for many people, it becomes everything. Days turn into years, years turn into decades, and life becomes a routine of responsibilities. Wake up, work, come home, repeat. There's always a reason to keep going. A promotion to chase, bills to pay, a future to prepare for. And before you know it, your life becomes something you plan to enjoy later. But later has a way of disappearing. There was a man who retired at 67 after working his entire life. He had saved enough, he had plans, travel, relax, finally enjoy himself. But when he sat down in his quiet home, something unexpected happened. He didn't know how to live without work. He realized he had spent so many years building a life that he had never actually lived it. He couldn't remember the last time he did something just for joy. Not productivity, not obligation, just joy. And that realization hit harder than any long day at work ever had. You see, no one reaches the end of their life and says, "I wish I had worked more." But many people say, "I wish I had lived more. I wish I had taken that trip. I wish I had spent more time with the people I love. I wish I had allowed myself to slow down and actually experience my life." Because in the end, it's not the hours you worked that stay with you. It's the moments you lived and the ones you missed. Then there is a regret that doesn't feel dramatic at first, but grows heavier over time. The regret of losing touch with people who mattered. Friendships, connections, relationships that once felt strong but slowly faded. Not because of conflict, but because of distance, busyness, assumptions. We'll catch up later. We should get together sometime. And that sometime never comes. As people get older, something begins to change. The circle becomes smaller, not just by choice, but by circumstance. People move away, people get busy, and eventually, people pass away. And suddenly, the absence becomes noticeable. The silence becomes louder, and the loneliness becomes real. There's a long-term study from Harvard that followed people for decades, and one of the clearest conclusions was this: the quality of your relationships is the strongest predictor of your happiness. Not your income, not your achievements, but your connections. Yet so many people allow those connections to slowly disappear. They stop reaching out. They wait for others to make the effort. They assume that if the relationship mattered, it would maintain itself. But relationships don't work that way. They require attention, care, effort. And when that effort disappears, so does the connection. The regret doesn't come immediately. It comes later, when you want someone to talk to and realize there's no one left. When you think about calling someone and realize you no longer know their number. When you remember a friendship that once meant everything and wonder what happened. That's when it hits. And finally, there is one regret that almost everyone understands, but often too late. The regret of not taking care of your health when you had the chance. When you're younger, your body is forgiving. You can ignore the signs. You can push through the fatigue. You can delay the checkups. You can tell yourself, I'll deal with it later. And for a while, that works, until it doesn't. Because your body remembers everything. The habits, the neglect, the choices. And over time, those choices begin to show up in ways that are harder to ignore. Pain that lingers, energy that fades, conditions that require constant management. And at that point, the question changes. It's no longer, what should I do? It becomes, why didn't I do something sooner? So many people say the same thing. I wish I had taken better care of myself. Not in a dramatic way, but in small, consistent ways, moving more, eating better, listening to their body, taking it seriously before it forced them to. Because once your health is compromised, everything else becomes harder. Your independence, your freedom, your ability to enjoy the life you worked so hard to build. And that's what makes this regret so powerful. It affects everything else. But here's something important. If you're hearing this right now, it's not too late. Not for you. Regret is not meant to trap you. It's meant to wake you up, to show you clearly where the path leads, so you can choose a different one. You can choose to live for yourself, starting today. You can choose to say the words that matter. You can choose to create moments instead of postponing them. You can choose to reconnect, even if it feels awkward at first. You can choose to take care of your body in whatever way you can right now, because the truth is, your story is not finished, not yet. And the choices you make today will become the memories you either cherish or regret. One day you will look back at this moment, at today, and you will either say, I'm glad I started when I did, or I wish I hadn't waited. So the question is simple. What will you choose? And if this message spoke to you, even a little, take one small step today. Just one. Call someone. Say something. Do something you've been putting off, because small steps are how you change the ending. And your ending doesn't have to be filled with regret. There's one more thing most people don't realize until very late. Regret doesn't usually come from the big mistakes. It comes from the quiet ones, the ones that felt small at the time. The moments you told yourself, I'll do it later. The times you stayed silent when you should have spoken. The days you chose comfort over courage. Because those small decisions don't feel important in the moment, but over time, they become your life. And one day you wake up and realize you didn't just miss a moment. You missed a version of your life that could have existed. A version where you were more honest, more present, more alive. There was a man who once said something very simple but very powerful. He said, I thought I had time until I didn't. And that's the illusion many people live under. Time feels endless until it suddenly feels limited. And when that shift happens, everything changes. The things that once felt urgent no longer matter. The things you ignored suddenly become everything. You don't think about work. You don't think about status. You think about people, moments, chances, and whether you truly lived or just went through the motions. That's why regret feels so heavy, because deep down, you know it didn't have to be that way. And here's something most people won't tell you. You don't wake up one day and suddenly feel regret. It builds quietly, year after year, choice after choice, until one day it becomes impossible to ignore. But here's the part that matters most. You are not there yet. If you're watching this, if you're listening to these words, you are still in the part of the story where things can change. And that's something many people never realize until it's gone. So instead of asking, "What do I regret?" ask yourself something more powerful. What am I still tolerating that I know I shouldn't be? What are you putting off? What conversation are you avoiding? What truth are you refusing to face? Because those are the seeds of future regret, not the past, the present. And the good news is, you have control over that, right now. There's a quiet kind of courage that doesn't look dramatic. It doesn't make headlines. It doesn't impress other people. But it changes everything. It's the courage to be honest with yourself, to admit, "This isn't the life I want anymore," or "I've been holding on to something that's hurting me," or even, "I've been waiting for the right time, and it never came." That kind of honesty is uncomfortable, but it's also where freedom begins, because the moment you stop pretending, you start living. Not perfectly, not all at once, but honestly. And honestly is enough. You don't need to fix everything today. You don't need a big plan. You don't need to reinvent your entire life overnight. You just need to stop ignoring what you already know. Maybe it's your health, maybe it's a relationship, maybe it's a dream you buried years ago. Whatever it is, it's still there, waiting. And it doesn't need perfection. It just needs your attention. There's something else people discover late in life, and it changes the way they see everything. They realize that happiness was never something they had to chase. It was something they kept postponing, waiting for the perfect moment, the perfect condition, the perfect timing. I'll be happy when. But that moment rarely comes, because life doesn't slow down and organize itself for you. It keeps moving, with or without your permission. So the only real question becomes, will you move with it, or will you keep waiting? There's a kind of peace that comes when you stop waiting, when you stop saying, "someday," and start saying, "today." Not in a dramatic way, not in a reckless way, but in a real way, a grounded way, a way that says, "I don't have forever, but I have now. And now is enough, if you use it." There was a woman, 80 years old, who said something I'll never forget. She said, "If I could go back, I wouldn't try to be perfect. I would just try to be present." That's it. Not perfect, present. Because presence is what creates memories. Presence is what builds connection. Presence is what turns ordinary moments into meaningful ones. And the opposite of presence is distraction, delay, avoidance, all the things that lead to regret. So if there's one thing to take from all of this, it's not fear, it's awareness. Awareness of how you're living, who you're becoming, and what you're choosing day after day. Because your life is not shaped by one big decision. It's shaped by small ones, repeated over time. And the beautiful thing is, that works both ways. Just like small choices can lead to regret, small choices can also lead to a life you're proud of, a life that feels full, a life that feels real. So start small. Reach out to someone you've been thinking about. Take a walk. Say what you've been holding in. Do something, not because you have to, but because you want to. That's where it begins, not in some distant future, but here, in this moment. And one day, when you look back at your life, you won't remember every detail, you won't remember every task, but you will remember how you felt, whether you were present, whether you were honest, whether you truly lived. And that's what matters. So don't wait for a wake-up call. Don't wait for something to go wrong. Don't wait until regret becomes your teacher. Let awareness be enough. Let this moment be enough. Because it is. And if you've made it this far, that means something in you is already ready. Ready to see things differently. Ready to choose differently. Ready to live, not later, but now. And that might be the most important decision you ever make.